So it is today that I ask you about some of the repositioning of, I'll start with foreign policy, with so much of what has traditionally been American policy and is clearly changing. We'll start with Ukraine. I wonder if you can remark on the president's remarks, how he's recharacterized Zelenskyy as a dictator and as the guy who initiated this whole conflict. I mean, it seems laughable, but it's clearly the thing that he's going to keep repeating.
On my podcast today, I call this 1984 today, because there is no truth to the fact that the Ukraine started this war 3 years ago. The Russians acted as they did, and the Ukrainians have fought back valiantly. But this is not a surprise. You and I talked about this during the late presidential campaign. I said that J.D. Vance absolutely opposed aid to Ukraine consistently, that I felt that Trump was going to do the same thing. And it's just a shame. But you know what's amazing? How does he get away with it? How do you get away with manufacturing history? And I listened this morning to right-wing radio on our former 810 station, and the person who was articulating his views was defending Donald Trump. It was astounding. It's completely counterfactual in its history. So my answer is, who are the people who are really concerned? The Europeans.
Let me just ask you, stop you right there as a quick follow-up. How were they this morning when you were listening? How were they defending Donald Trump and this disposition towards Zelenskyy?
They're saying that Donald Trump is right, that we've got to end the war, and that the Russians and the Ukrainians have to get together, and they've got to do it, and that Donald Trump can end the war. He's the only one who can do it. Look where we are. At least we're talking about ending the war. And, of course, they did not address the fact that Donald Trump claimed that Ukraine started the war, because that's an indefensible position.
I see. So they did pass over that. Okay, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. So
no, it's perfectly all right.
So how does that? So characterize this current situation. You've got a peace.
Well,
you've got a peace deal being incubated, and the key player in the peace is not participating in the negotiations. It's
You're
insanity.
correct when you said that this is a complete reshaping of American foreign policy. The desertion of Europe is stunning. And may I tell you what this reminds me of? In 1938, in Munich, when Hitler of Germany, Daladier of France, Chamberlain of England, and Mussolini of Italy carved up Czechoslovakia, a country which was not represented in the talks. It's the same thing today. It's a repeat of history. The Ukrainians are being excluded from the process. And the only thing that can happen now is the Europeans have said, no matter what the United States does, Europe is committed to helping Ukraine. The other thing is, according to the polls I've seen, Zelenskyy's popularity is over the moon in Ukraine. I mean,
it's over 50%. I don't know where the moon is, but it's over 50%.
Talk about, well, that's amazing. Actually, it was 59%.
Well, it's also in contrast to what Trump was saying.
But can you imagine Donald Trump suggesting it was only 4%?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ludicrous. I don't believe a thing that Donald Trump says, I've got to tell you. And when he said that on Truth Social and on his Twitter account, that he who saves his country does not violate any law, is absolutely astounding. It's incomprehensible. And you know the real shame in all of this? The Republicans. The Republicans are silent. And when all is said and done, and ultimately history will catch up with Donald Trump, he'll be blamed. But you know who will really be blamed? The Republicans, for their abject silence. To me, it is the most disgraceful display by any major political party in the history of our country.
Well, this is a party that's been completely taken over by MAGA. The GOP doesn't even exist anymore. I would rebrand it MAGA if I were,
I would simply call it the party of Trump. And if you remember, on the ellipse on January 6th, Donald Trump Jr. said, this is no longer the Republican Party. It is the party of Donald Trump.
Albert, John and I have a disagreement. I want to call it MAGA, GOP, and he wants to call it the party of Trump. I think MAGA is a better brand.
Why?
Well, because I believe it's more representative. Which one do you think is catchier, Albert?
I feel uncomfortable picking here between the two. I could put a poll up if you'd like.
Yeah, that's good.
It's the same thing, but
should
the
GOP?
The MAGA
of course, it's the same thing. That's why branding is important, John Rothmann.
The MAGA movement has no power.
Why are you yelling?
The power of decision making is Donald Trump's, pure and simple. And the problem is that the so-called MAGA movement follows Donald Trump. There is
That's
no
right.
dissent.
Albert, put up the poll and we'll figure out. It's exactly the same thing. You're absolutely right. I'm not. John is, of course, 100% right. They are the same thing, MAGA and the party of Trump. But now we're trying
But
to
I
decide
blame Trump
how to
because
rebrand
he
the
is
Republican Party.
Trump is the Pied Piper.
Well, what's interesting to me, quite seriously, is the way in which many of the tenets of republicanism, if you will, have been completely tossed out. And they were tossed out overnight. So this guy has written, I'll give you an example, just because we're talking about Ukraine. And this is an extraordinary thing that they've sidled up to Russia this way. I mean, Russia was the biggest sort of Bond villain enemy that you could find in foreign policy that was related to republicanism. All of a sudden, the Republicans have caved. Now they're on board, and they're singing the same hymn that Donald Trump is regarding Russia.
That's my point. That's exactly my point, Mark. It is Trump who is singing the song, and it is the so-called MAGA movement, which is simply the movement of Donald Trump, that is following him. I can tell you with absolute certainty that Eisenhower and Nixon and Ford and Reagan and Bush would absolutely reject this vision of America's role in the world. It's tragic. But you know, it's even worse when you can get away with saying Ukraine started the war and nobody says a damn thing. That's a disgrace.
Well, the way they fly over and around a lot of things that Donald Trump has said is an extraordinary thing. But I thought you were going to say something else, because to me, this really is worse. The abdication of American government, the different branches of government.
No, it's the Republican
others.
Party. It is the Republican Party. The American government is a victim, if you will, of the fact that the Democrats don't have the ability to influence anything. They are a minority party in every sense of the word, including the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. But you have to understand something. An election does not override the rule of law. And what Donald Trump is doing is overriding the rule of law. When the Justice Department can fire all of the inspectors general, that is to say, all the inspectors general are fired by Donald Trump. But you know, it's very interesting. The new Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, is an election denier. And who is Donald Trump putting into key positions of power? Election deniers. It is, and we haven't even hit Kash Patel. I just finished his book. His book is appalling and needs to be read by the American people. If I were in the United States Senate, I would take sections of that book and pose the tough questions to him. When you read his book, and I want to just show you because you are video, this is the book. Forgive me for moving, but this is the book. It is
Government
Gangsters.
It's called. Yeah.
When you read this book, and everybody should read it, and every member of the Senate should read it, this is the most abominable thing to imagine. And this man would be director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It'll make J. Edgar Hoover look like a saint.
Well, he will be part of the recriminatory jihad that Trump is on, and he's really been quite dogged in going after everyone and everything he associates with having pursued him.
Absolutely. And there's no question.
The FBI was part of it. So Patel
I
will go to the FBI.
I got to tell you, I had a vigorous debate with a very close friend of mine who said, "Oh, John, Trump is not going after people. He doesn't want revenge. He wants to do good things to the country." Well, I would ask my friend, and I will see him shortly, what do you think now? And let me make one other comment. J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, delivered a speech in Munich that was appalling in every dimension. And even worse, he met with the far-right AfD party leader, essentially endorsing a party which in Germany, by the Germans, is viewed as a neo-Nazi party.
Oh, well, let's just put some specifics on some of these sweeping assaults that you're making rhetorically. So, what you mentioned, J.D. Vance, what did he say that was so objectionable?
J.D. Vance told the Europeans, the problem is with you, not with the Russians. It's I wish you could play sections of it. Because
Well, he
I'm
talked
not
about
supposed to say.
democracy as well, and the fact
Right.
that free speech is going away, and he talked about the fact that the far right, as you suggested, in Germany, needs to have a place at the table, have a place at the electoral table, and needs to be
They are
heard
the
in a bigger
second
way.
largest party in Germany. And let me tell you, the German chancellor uh, made
The
a
German
comment about
chancellor
this.
read him the riot act,
He
more or
sure
less.
did.
Yeah.
And for the vice president of the United States, the German election is on the 23rd of January, of February. For the vice president of the United States to interfere in an election campaign that close to the election, it's unconscionable. And of course, Elon Musk has supported. Look, I have no words that I can describe my feeling about Elon Musk. And you know what's most interesting the last couple of days? They're debating who's really in charge of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. And what you pointed out about Donald Trump's golf trips is absolutely true. They've spent almost $11 million on these trips. Is that government efficiency? It's astounding.
Rothmann is riled up today. I like it. Says Tammy. CC Ryder points this out. Trump taking over the FCC and SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, is similar to Orban taking over Hungary's media and judicial system. And the Orban playbook is really the blueprint here. Revoke licenses, convert media to Fox 2.0 clones, and prevent SEC security fraud investigations. Right on. I think that's an absolutely fair and incisive
Look at the Associated Press.
take on
This
things.
is not abstract talk. The Associated Press refuses to use the term Gulf of America and still refuses to call it Mount McKinley in Alaska. And what does Donald Trump do? He bans them from the press office and bans them from the White House and won't even let them travel with him when he travels. The Associated Press, for God's sake.
This is just like Hitler's
indignant.
Jeff O'Connor says this is just like Hitler's pretext that Poland started firing across the German border and Germany was justifiably retaliating when it effectively began World War II. I mean,
Exactly.
And more on Orban. Orban says Rich has created this conservative wonderland. He's been in power and used wedge issues to get people on board. He's codified in the Constitution taking away rights from the LGBTQ community. Yeah, it is interesting that wedge issue political strategy has worked so effectively in this country and around the world. I mean, blaming immigrants, blaming members of the LGBTQ community, I mean, and sort of
transgender. Are you listening to what they're doing about transgender? Transgender people have now been banned from joining the military and are being expelled from the military. Well, replace the term transgender with any ethnic or religious or, well, this is the time when Trump most assuredly exposes who he really is. It's shameful. And there's silence from the Republicans. By the way, some of you, our listeners I know, are saying, but John, why aren't you yelling at the Democrats? Because the Democrats don't have the votes to make a difference. They're speaking out.
What can the Democrats do, though, John? Is the answer nothing?
Yes, exactly, until the midterm elections. And we better hope
okay,
that
then
in the
let me
midterm elections, there is an overwhelming reaction. And let me also point out, there is no titular leader of the Democratic Party. In the old days, when you were defeated for president, you became the titular leader of the party. That doesn't exist anymore. So the Democratic Party is rudderless. And certainly the leadership of Chuck Schumer is, well, I think very weak, although he says the right things. He just doesn't have the votes.
He does say the right things. He's not the right guy communicating, and I agree.
Yeah. And Hakeem Jeffries, who's very articulate, doesn't have the votes. But remember, there are several special elections taking place. Maybe if the Democrats can win those seats, they will have the House majority by 2 or 3 votes. But that's so speculative.
But that also presumes the kind of government that would be in any way chastened by the congressional resolutions,
there won't
congressional
be
legislation. You've got a president now who's basically said to a judge who responded to the overreach associated with the new administration, doesn't matter. We're going through with this anyway.
But that's not just Trump. That's J.D. Vance as well, they're basically challenging the whole thesis of Marbury versus Madison. The job in 1804, the job of the government, 1803, sorry about that, off by a year. The reality is that the whole point is that the courts are supposed to check the executive, that they're supposed to hold the executive accountable accountable to the Constitution of the United States. Let me tell you something. I'm so upset, so disgusted. And those of you who've listened to me on the radio for many years know I'm generally very even-tempered, very reasonable. But what Donald Trump is doing needs to be reacted to in the strongest possible words and the strongest possible actions. So that's the reason if I sound overly wrought today, it is because we all should be overwrought. When Joe Biden defined it as a battle for American democracy, he was absolutely correct.
John, I'm going to press you on something because you can educate me. I'm not being facetious. I'm sincere, which is a rare moment on this show for me, the sincerity. I did want to ask you about being the minority party, because you make a big thing like, I asked you, can't they do anything? And you said, no, not until they get the votes. I don't agree with that. But again, educate me. You may be right, I may be wrong. I remember the Biden administration, and I remember the Obama administration. And during that time, they at times had minority numbers in Congress. I mean, look at the Biden administration most recently. They were able, as the minority party, Republicans, to make life pretty rough for Joe Biden. He couldn't get a lot of stuff done, right? Tommy Tuberville blocked the...
Oh, I agree. Individual actions can be taken.
Oh, well, then tell me why the hell the Democrats can't lean into some of that, because I think they
are.
I think they are. Exactly.
But they
don't
have the votes in the House. They don't have the votes in the Senate. And let me tell you something. When you have a majority, however narrow, and now Donald Trump has done the most brilliant thing of all, and it really is the right thing to do. He's saying, let the Supreme Court decide. But he's betting on something. He's betting on the fact that the conservative majority in the Supreme Court will take this view of the expansion of presidential power and let him run with it. And there is a question. Are we in a constitutional crisis? I think we are, because I think the challenges to the Constitution are real. But what happens if the court rules against Trump? What happens if majority of the Supreme Court says you've gone too far? You know what Donald Trump's answer is? He's already said it. He doesn't care what the courts say. He believes in the idea of a unitary executive, and he intends to plow forward with everything he has. And, you know, I just talked with my old friend Bill Ridings, who wrote the book Rating the Presidents, and we were talking about what we would do about Donald Trump. And Ridings has it broken down into categories. But I told him, when history is written, Donald Trump will be viewed as an activist president who wanted to mold the presidency in his image. And that will make him an effective president. What will bring him down, and I believe he will be brought down, is the arrogance of power, his own hubris, and ultimately the American people will catch on. We just have to keep reminding them. And the Democrats have to tell that story as effectively as they can. And they have to develop a method of conveying that to the American people. And that means advertising. That means appropriate statements to the American people. That means spending money on communicating with the American people. But more than anything else, they have to have a plan for 2026 in terms of winning back the House and doing as much as they can in the Senate. As long as Donald Trump has these majorities, it's very hard to stop him. And may I just point out as well, who is Donald Trump appointing to all these key positions? Election deniers. Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard. Let me tell you the most upsetting thing to me, and they're all upsetting to me, but Robert Kennedy Jr., can you imagine? And now we're seeing the administration moving to destroy the vaccine for COVID. They have tremendous surplus of those vaccines. They're talking about destroying them. And that is the work of Robert Kennedy Jr. It is exactly what we feared. It is exactly what's happening. And it's exactly what must be prevented.
Well,
I mean, I can't begin to tell.
I'll work back from RFK Jr. because that was the last thing you referred to. He, despite guarantees during his confirmation hearings, has said, I'm going to look at all the vaccine protocols. So, and those of you who, have spoken eloquently and persistently about the power of many of these vaccines. I mean, the measles vaccine, the polio vaccine, et cetera. All that stuff's back on the table. And
Look at the
now
measles outbreak right now.
in Texas, yeah, there's among a group of people who have been, these are Mennonites, but in the Mennonite, we were talking about this yesterday, in the Mennonite code of conduct and sort of the religiosity around the Mennonite sect, there's nothing about rejecting these vaccines. So this is a total one-off. It's a complete, the fact that they're Mennonites is almost just irrelevant. But I wanted to mention, because you touched on it, the court orders, and I was asking you, about these court orders, and they've already defied one of them, as you know, and there more to come. They're not dispersing these monies that are earmarked for foreign aid contracts and grants. They've already been decided upon. The money's already been
Look at
appropriated.
AID, for God's sake. The destruction of AID
but
will
the court,
affect
put to the
people all
point,
over
if
the
you're
world.
looking for the court to save this country and in any way buttress constitutional limitations, don't, because this is an administration that seems committed to ignoring the court in many instances, and maybe ultimately all instances.
Pause for a moment. If this administration defies the Supreme Court, I worked for Richard Nixon. There was talk in the Nixon administration by Nixon himself of defying the Supreme Court in the United States versus Richard Nixon. In the end, Nixon understood he couldn't do that. But you take a look at the picture that you've got up on your screen right now, and you look at the justices of the court. There are two justices, Thomas and Alito, who most certainly believe in a unitary presidency. There's no doubt about it. The others are a question mark. And the most important single person is the Chief Justice of the United States, because John Roberts wants to preserve and protect the court. He's a conservative. But I'm hoping that the conservative majority will understand the damage that Donald Trump is doing. And let me tell you, if there is a constitutional crisis, I think we're in one, but were there to be an even broader constitutional crisis, it would be if Donald Trump defies the courts. And that means the Supreme Court, because everything will ultimately get to the Supreme Court. It's just fascinating.
Well, it's fascinating, but it's also deeply
Scary.
disturbing. And honestly, I think you could anticipate it. We talked about it on this show. I mean, the playbook was there, Project 2025. You spoke of it on this show repeatedly. And the idea somehow that what Steve Bannon was talking about, we ran the actual clip over and over of Steve Bannon talking about we're going to flood the zone, media is the enemy, and you're just going to keep the media busy because we're going to come at the media with so much stuff right away that they won't be able to focus on anything. And that's exactly what has happened.
You're
They've
absolutely
executed
right.
this with a perfection, sadly.
And that's why, in terms of rating a president, as I discussed with Bill Ridings, when you talk about it from that point of view, Donald Trump has been an exceptionally able president in terms of carrying out his goals. How he'll be judged by history is another matter. There are five different categories.
Let me just take issue with that. I mean, I get it. That's almost like saying, well, the huge bank heist that was carried out perfectly, you got to give them credit. They had a strategy. They broke into the bank. They got out with all the money, and, tip of the hat of history to that.
I don't want to tip the hat to history,
but,
the bank heist.
But
look how it's
come
affecting
on,
us,
John.
Mark.
Yeah.
Look how we're responding. Look what we're seeing. Thousands of government workers. Can you believe they fired members who were absolutely essential on our nuclear plan? And then when they wanted to rehire them, they couldn't find them. This isn't government efficiency. This is government by chaos.
I would say that they have been reckless, and
yes,
that you can say, well, he's carried through on what said he was going to do. I mean, basically turned over the actual governance to a guy who wasn't even in government, had no experience in government, doesn't know how government works. Let me tell you, watching Sean Hannity talk to Donald Trump and Elon Musk was like watching three guys who have no sense of how government works talking about how successful his first month has been.
You're mistaken on something. They do know how government works, and they do know how government doesn't work. And they understand that unless you have a real opposition to the president from their own party, that you aren't going to succeed. Nobody today talks about Liz Cheney. Nobody talks about Adam Kinzinger. And finally, the former majority leader of the United States Senate is standing up. And what does it mean? Nothing, because the vote for confirmation is 52 to 49, 52 to 48 rather, on all of these major appointments. It is Mitch McConnell's disgrace and the Republican Party's disgrace. So, I mean, the great thing is I love disagreeing with you because then we can have an argument, but we don't disagree on any of this.
No,
and that should scare our listeners.
Of course not. No, we don't. We don't disagree. And the one thing I will say, and of course, I've been right and you've been wrong, which is always the way it's going to be till the end of time. I didn't have faith in the American institutions to protect themselves. Like
you're writing off the Supreme Court before they've ruled?
It doesn't matter whether
yes, it does.
No, it doesn't, because
yes, I disagree.
This administration will do what they want, and if they have to demonize the Supreme Court, they'll do it.
No,
they
have
an
may
agenda.
Demonize it, but the Supreme Court is the final word.
No.
For those who think
they blew off one court, why do you think that they literally
because
blew off this U.S. district judge
who
just ruled on the dispersal of monies overseas?
One
they just
court
blew them
is
off.
Not the Supreme Court. Okay, maybe you're right, but if you're right and I'm
I don't know.
wrong,
that's like listening to an alcoholic tell me one drink isn't 10 drinks. Okay.
The Supreme Court is the supreme law of the land. That's why Al Gore did not become president on a 5-4 vote. And what did Al Gore do? He accepted what the Supreme Court did. And let me tell you, that will be the precedent for all of us to watch for.
Well,
if the Supreme
you mentioned
Court
Al Gore,
maybe
the Democrats and Al Gore rolled over too quickly for the Supreme Court. That was a banana republic ruling, and you had the brothers. The brother of the presidential candidate is a governor of the state around which.
Look, I don't want to rehash the 2000 election. You and I agree on that.
Why are you yelling?
All right, yeah, go
but
ahead.
I am going to say clearly, everyone listening to the sound of our voice must understand that the only agency that can stop Donald Trump is the Supreme Court of the United States. Donald Trump is placing a bet. He wants the Supreme Court to decide some of these cases as soon as possible because he understands that if he wins those cases, he will be unstoppable until the next election.
Did you think the Supreme Court would rule that Trump has immunity as the chief executive?
No.
I didn't either.
No, I didn't
either. So this court is capable of some extraordinary rulings. I mean,
that's exactly my point.
Extraordinary thing they did.
That is exactly what I'm saying. And we have to, and I'm hoping that John Roberts, as the Chief Justice, and that the other justices on the court will understand the significance. I'm not counting on Thomas or Alito, but I'm counting on the others. Kavanaugh has dissented on occasion. We've seen the slight shift. We just have to hope. And in the meantime, what you are doing and what I'm doing in my podcast is to try to alert people to the problem. And I refuse to accept the fact that our system will not work. That's what people said during the Nixon days, and it worked, and we will make it work again. I believe that with all my heart, or else I'll tell you one thing, our time together on this podcast may be extremely limited.
No,
because
that's
if Trump decides to go after podcasts,
he'll go after the big platforms, which is already happening. I mentioned it before in the first half hour. The FCC is investigating NPR. This you'll like. We Run San Jose says, agree with John on this. This Supreme Court supremely sucks, but I don't believe they'll give up any of their power.
I hope you're right, and I believe it. I have to believe it. If I'm going to believe in the future of this country, I have to believe that the court will stand up. And there's something else I have to believe, that the American people in the midterm elections of 2026 will administer a rebuff to Donald Trump. Look, did you read in this morning's paper?
That's presuming a lot about the illegitimacy of the elections coming up. I think there's going to be a lot between now and then. And let me just go back to this, because I think there's an important thing at the end of this comment. I don't believe, says We Run San Jose, I don't believe they'll give up any of their power. He or she, We Run San Jose, is talking about the fact that by conferring a lot of power with the chief executive, they are essentially diminishing their own power. And so it's for that reason, John, that I think your argument gets even stronger, that the Supreme Court would likely rule against the unitary executive
They can't
theory.
overrule Marbury versus Madison. That would be shattering. And for people who haven't read it, look it up, Marbury Rivers Madison, 1803, and you'll see that the Supreme Court clearly says that they are the check, they are the balance. And I know you don't agree with me, but I trust the American people. I think the American people are going to stand up and just say no.
My God.
Have the American people known?
I absolutely do not trust the American people.
Good.
You're 100% right.
There's always been in this country 30 to 35% idiots.
Yeah, that's a great thing to say, and that's ABC News' Jim Avila, but the reality is it's way more than that, okay? And they just elected this guy, so don't tell me how great the American people are. But here's somebody who agrees with me.
I believe for every action, there's a reaction.
All right.
We might as well not hold an election.
Lamakumeka says, agree with Mark. They will defy all court orders, including SCOTUS. Again, John, it's not that SCOTUS won't rule the way they're going to rule, but ultimately the unitary executive theory may carry the day. In Trump land, that is what is sort of the coin of the realm.
If Donald Trump does that, the Republican Party will have to splinter. It will splinter. Republicans are not going to sit back and, I hope, and watch that kind of action. I knew that the American people wouldn't accept it from Nixon, and I don't believe they'll accept it from Trump.
If Nixon were president today, he'd still be president regardless of that scandal. It would go down in a totally different way. Here is depressed Canadian saying 1,000 history books were written about Kissinger, John. It didn't stop him from being a horrific policy advisor for 60 years. Thanks for the $10 super chat.
That's true. That's true. But then again,
history books are crazy things, John. You know, they recharacterize incidents, and there has been a recharacterization of even this recent history with the Ukraine war and at the feet of this new president. It's remarkable to me.
We have to reject it. We have to raise our voices. I will certainly not be silent. I want you to know, whether it's my podcast or the public addresses I give throughout Northern California, I am going to continue to thunder about this. And the more we talk about it, and the more we raise the issue, and the more we raise these kinds of questions, the better off the American people will be. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels, Mark. And I don't want to.
And by the way, I even accept, as you know, incremental change and information is part of that, and getting this information out is part of a potential change, or in this case, holding off perhaps what could be, these changes that are so very disturbing.
Mark, I know you've kept me longer than you want to.
I put up John's podcast title, if you would, please. It's there.
Let me just put in a pitch. For those of you who listen to Mark Thompson and the excellent guests that he brings on, we want to make sure that the Mark Thompson program continues and prospers. And that means contribute. And I want you to know that it's appreciated by all of us. This is the kind of programming excellence which we need in order to alert the American people. So don't just contribute, but spread the word to your friends about this program. Let them know what is happening. And Mark, anytime I can be of service, I know I'm generally here on Wednesdays, but anytime I can be of service, all you have to do is ask. This is, for me, the ultimate honor to be able to continue to offer this kind of commentary.
Well, Albert, now I feel bad that we're wrapping up John Rothmann. If I'd known he had that in him, I would have accounted for even more time. My God, when he lavishes praise on us and the work we do, I feel bad having to wrap him up, Albert. But I do. I've got to do it.
I do have some good news for John. A lot of people agree with Party of Trump over MAGA movement.
Oh, MAGA movement.
May I say to all of our listeners, I see the overwhelming majority which I have received. Just remember, in the bottom line, Mark Thompson and I agree overwhelmingly. It's a problem, and we're going to confront it. And thank you all very much.
All right. There you have it. John Rothmann, everybody.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.